Hey family, listen, Pastor Laurent here. I'm so glad that you are here. Yep, I'm so glad that you came on back. Listen, we've been in this wonderful wrestling of a series the last few weeks where we are wrestling with rejection. If that's you, if you've ever felt the tug of war, if that's you and you've ever felt the repression of rejection, then listen, this series is for you. I want you to stick around tonight. I believe that there is just a word that will speak to you, that will encourage you, that will enhance and will sharpen your skills as you kind of navigate through this life as you experience rejection. The reality is, all of us will. No matter who you are, no matter where you are, no matter what you have, no matter what you do, none of us will be able to escape the ramifications of rejection. But here is the caveat. Rejection does not have to be the end all be all. Rejection does not have to be the final nail in the coffin for you. In fact, the reality is rejection is God's redirection. So if you've ever felt a door closing, if you've ever felt a window shutting, if you've ever felt an opportunity fleeting, then listen, this series is for you. I'm glad that you're here. If you've been wrestling with this thing called rejection, then I believe the Lord wants to speak to you. Listen, I'm so glad again that you're here. We've been in this series for the last few weeks now, and God is doing some amazing and incredible things in the hearts and the lives of God's people. If this is your first time joining a Fresh Fire TNL, first, let me just say welcome, welcome, welcome. If you will, go ahead and hit the like button at the top. Go ahead and make sure that you subscribe because I don't want you to miss anything that the Spirit is doing, speaking, and moving in your life. If you back, listen, let me just say welcome back, family. I'm glad that you're here. We've been unpacking this series about rejection for the last couple of weeks now, and we're just beginning to start taking the training wheels off of this thing. And so I just believe tonight that your rejection is really the window to your belonging. So the places and spaces that you've been carved out of, etched out of, rejected from, I believe that, listen, God is about to reorchestrate, realign, and reestablish you, but you've got to do your part. And the part that you've got to be willing to do is reassess the rejection that you have experienced. Last week, we talked about the difference between the experience of rejection and being able to embrace the outcome of rejection. So listen, we going swim a little bit more. We're going to dive just a little bit deeper because the truth of the matter is, for those of us that aren't careful, for those of us that aren't mindful, for those of us that aren't, here it is, intentional, rejection will do a thing to us that will eat us up. And it's this thing that I like to call rejection infection. And so if we aren't careful with how we assess our rejection, rejection very quickly can turn into an infection. And listen, if you know anything, if you've ever had anything viral, you've ever had a cold, you've ever had a sinus infection, you've ever had allergies, you've ever had the flu, you've ever had anything that just don't feel good, you can feel me on this. That if you've ever had a common cold, you've ever had the symptoms of something that was going on, and if you really trace it back to its origin and the beginning, you didn't just have all these feelings all at once. Infection really don't work like that. Infection is usually like this one localized area, and when this one localized area gets untreated, what happens is the infection then begins to spread. And so the same goes for us that have been rejected. When we don't deal with the rejection, when we don't sit in the rejection to learn the lessons from the rejection, when we don't learn what God wants to do with the rejection in terms of restore, reroute, reestablish us, the rejection will do quite the opposite, is it will then turn into infection. Real quick, shameless plug. If you did not catch yesterday's sermon, I want you to go back. Sunday's sermon, which was September the 14th, when we preached on the topic, still from the series, Wrestling with Rejection, but from the title, From Brokenness to Breakthrough. And if we aren't careful with how our perspective and how we see and shape our rejection, oh, that thing can go one of two ways. And so what we talked about was the importance now of rejection being a lookout. And so you just can't look at this thing just from one linear, narrow-minded perspective. You've got to be able to see both sides. Yes, it hurt, but if I look both ways, I can see how this rejection is able to help. And so again, if we're not careful, if we're not intentional, what will happen is the rejection that we have received will then fester, grow, and manifest into an infection. And so here we are now, where we're dealing with now a rejection infection, where rejection now has taken such a toll on us. Rejection has done such a number on us. We've not really been able to classify, quantify, or qualify the rejection that we have received, that what it does is it begins to eat us up. Rejection, if we aren't careful, will begin to chip away and diminish your value. That's why you got to look both ways. That's why you can't allow the rejection that you have received to turn into an infection. You cannot afford to allow the no. You can't afford to allow the denial. You can't afford to allow the disapproval. You can't afford to allow them walking out. You can't afford to allow them saying that you aren't their choice, you aren't their pick, for that thing to fester and grow into such a place that you have now begun believing that there is something wrong with you. When the truth of the matter is, when we experience rejection, here it is, it has less to do with you and more to do with how people see you. And I know you might be scratching your head at that one, but let me go a little bit further with this, because how people see you has nothing to do with you. As long as you're showing up whole, as long as you're showing up holy, as long as you're showing up wholesome, as long as you're showing up positive, as long as you're showing up as the best version of yourself with compassion and with empathy, you can afford to allow people's perception of you, here it is, or an individual's misconception of you, determine and shape how you see the true and authentic version of you. So we're dealing tonight with rejection infection. When rejection now goes untreated, when rejection goes unchecked, when rejection goes unhandled, undealt with, what happens is it brews, and it brews over. You ever put a pot on the stove? You ever put a pot on the stove and you got it boiling, and you really don't even have to have the heat on high for you to experience this bubbling over effect. You ever put something on the stove, and before you know it, that thing is just bubbling over, it's spilling over. That's what a rejection infection will do. It started as just a small little simmer in a pot. It started as a small little simmer in this one place, but little by little, rejection after rejection, decibel of increase of heat, as the heat gets turned up incrementally, so does the rejection get turned up internally. And thus now what we're dealing with now is a radical infection, what I'm calling a rejection infection. And what happens with this rejection infection, what happens now is when the rejection that you have experienced, because you still haven't been able to embrace the outcome. But what happens is that when the rejection that you have experienced now is now attacking your immune system. That's what a rejection infection does. It's when the rejection that you've experienced now, unchecked, begins to brew over. And what happens now is you're now dealing with a spiritual immune infection. When rejection now is now an attack on the immune system. What happens now is you've begun to see your rejection uh, in such a way that you now begin living in such a way, living with stuff that wasn't even directed toward you, wasn't even living with stuff that wasn't even a personal attack on you. Again, oftentimes when we experience rejection, it's it's not personal, but it's purposeful. Let me show you what I mean. We will begin to when we're dealing with a rejection infection, we'll begin to internalize now the rejection that we have experienced. There's a story in the Old Testament. We talked about this a few weeks ago in the book of Samuel, where we talked about the rejection that David had experienced at the hands of Saul and other people. But what is so interesting here in this story, I want to go a little bit deeper with this because I want you to know the key players and the characters in this narrative in First Samuel. And the Bible begins talking about Saul, and Saul now is he's the king on the throne. And I want you don't miss this. Stay with me. Saul is the king on the throne. I want to talk about how rejection now, you begin processing rejection and internalizing rejection until that internalized rejection now becomes a rejection infection, even over stuff that had nothing, nor was it even directed towards you. Here it is, because now Saul now is the reigning king. Okay, in First Samuel, Saul is on the throne, but jealous of David. On the throne, but jealous of David. In fact, scripture lets us know now that Saul had defeated thousands. Okay, but David now had defeated tens of thousands. And I don't want you to miss this in First Samuel, because again, Saul is the king, but he's comparing himself now to someone that isn't even sitting in the same seat. David was anointed to become king, but let's be clear, David was not the king. Saul was. And Saul now sees this little shepherd boy and is intimidated by this young man, even though David is nowhere on the level that Saul is. Saul's insecurity, Saul's internalized rejection now has him now sitting in a place of power, but still comparing himself to peasants. That's what rejection will do. Rejection will have you seated in a place of power, comparing yourself to people that aren't where you are. David will be king. Saul is king. And the only difference now is that David has defeated more folks, but Saul's the one on the throne. And instead of Saul being confident and secure in who he is and the seat he sits in, what he does is he begins to think now, oh, I know I'm the king, but who really is the biggest here? Is it me or is it David? Who really is the baddest? And that's what rejection will do. So Saul now is worried about David. And then entering into the story now is Samuel. That's where we find ourselves tonight in Samuel 1, 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 16. We'll move throughout a couple of the scriptures together. But I want you to get this when we talk about rejection, because here it is now. Saul is worried about David, and Samuel is worried about Saul. Don't miss this. Saul's worried about David, and Samuel is worried about Saul. In fact, the Bible says in 1 Samuel chapter 1, verses 16, the question is asked. Now, God says to Samuel, how long will you mourn over Saul? This is the Lord now asking Samuel, how long will he mourn over the fact that Saul will not be king? He was king. Saul was king. But God has now rejected Saul. Stay with me. Stay with me. And now Samuel begins to mourn over the fact that Saul will no longer be king. And Samuel doesn't just mourn over the fact that Saul has been rejected, but Samuel mourns so much so that God has to step in and flat out ask Samuel, how long are you going to mourn over the fact that I have rejected Saul? I don't want you to miss this, right? Because God now asks the question to Samuel. In other words, how long are you going to be stuck over the fact that I have rejected Saul? It gotten so bad that the Lord just had to flat out ask Samuel. In other words, not only how long will you mourn over the fact that I have rejected Saul, but the real question here is, how long will you stay stuck in this place? Samuel just couldn't get over the fact that Saul would no longer be king. So much so, it took him so long to process and get over the fact that Saul had been rejected, that God himself had to ask Samuel, how long will you be stuck over the fact that Saul is not the one that had been chosen? And I need you to get this, because I begin to ask myself now, why in the world would God make an obvious statement to Samuel? Here it is. Because sometimes we get so busy looking at the next person that we miss what God is doing in our own lives. Sometimes we get so stuck in the rejection that we have received from one person, from one door, that we are pigeonholed. We become gridlocked. We become stuck with moving forward through the door that God is opening. Here it is now. I don't want you to miss this. Although God had rejected Saul, God had already called and anointed David. But Samuel almost missed the fact that God was trying to do a new thing, because Samuel was still stuck on the old thing that God was doing. I don't know. I don't know who this is for tonight. I don't know who needs to hear this, but I need you to know tonight that rejection, if you aren't careful, rejection will have you miss the right thing because you busy focused on the wrong thing. There had already been a new king that had been appointed. There had already been a new king that God already had in mind by the name of David. It no longer was Saul. Saul was the old thing, but Samuel couldn't move. Samuel couldn't move into the old thing because Samuel was still stuck on the old thing. I said Samuel couldn't move into the new thing because Samuel was still stuck on the old thing. Samuel couldn't really celebrate the fact that God had chosen David because Samuel was still mourning over the fact that God had rejected Saul. And I just need you to know sometimes that we get so focused on the problem that we are experiencing in our rejection that we miss the possibility as a result of the rejection. And so I need you to know tonight that, listen, rejection will have you miss the right thing because you're so busy focused on the wrong thing. Where is God leading you as a result of your rejection? What door is God opening for you as a result of the door that got rejected? What is God doing over here to the right because of what God had to reject over here to the left? Where is God sending you in the north because God had to close some stuff up in the south? What new people is God calling you to share space with in this new season, because you've been hooked up with the wrong people in previous and prior seasons? Don't miss the new thing. Focus on the old thing. Don't miss the right thing being focused on the wrong thing. Don't miss the possibility being focused on the problem. Yes, God had rejected Saul. Samuel, but Samuel, you about to miss the fact that God had chosen someone else. Samuel's so stuck on the problem, he misses the opportunity of what God is doing presently. Sometimes we are more worried about the next one, so much so that it robs us of validating and confirming and affirming the gifts within ourselves. When you run the risk of comparing yourself to him, to her, to this one, to that one, to Lottie, to Dottie, to everybody, rejection, infection has taken over. When you no longer see your own gift, your own value, your own need to be whole, that you would rather stay in the cycle of brokenness with people that didn't choose you. And hear me tonight, I know how hard it is to process our humanness, our human emotion, our human feelings against rejection. When reality sets in, with the truth being what you wanted didn't want you back. What you chose didn't choose you. Will you allow that rejection to be a moment of redirection? Will you allow that rejection to be a moment of realignment? We get stuck at the fact that folk has discarded us as trash, that we miss the beautiful parable that one man's trash is another man's treasure. Hear me tonight. Don't you go another minute. Don't you go another day. Don't you go another hour, not another month. Don't you dare finish the year out suffering silently, living with rejection infection. You know you're living with rejection infection when you find yourself often comparing yourself to somebody else. Well, why I don't have what they have? Why can't I do what they do? Why don't I have the type of giftedness or charisma or talent or uniqueness or nerve that they have? This constant comparison, like Saul and David. David is the shepherd boy. Saul is the king. But rejection infection wouldn't allow Saul to see his greatness because infection had taken over. Don't miss who you are. Don't miss what you are. Don't miss all that you are. And don't miss whose you are as you're wrestling with rejection. Jacob put it like this when he was wrestling with the angel of the Lord in Genesis. He says, I won't let go until you bless me. May that be your testimony that God, listen, I won't stop wrestling until you release me from the infection of rejection. It's been eating you up, been tearing you up, got you thinking you aren't good enough, got you thinking you aren't enough, got you thinking you will never be enough, thinking you don't have what it takes, that you can't go all the way. The devil is a liar. Rejection is a liar. Come out, wherever you are. We write prescriptions in this series. We writing prescriptions for your spiritual antibiotic so that you can be free and released from the shackle and the burden of rejection infection. I'm your doctor, baby, and we got a prescription that Jesus is about to sign off on for you to release you from living in the realm of rejection. I declare tonight that the Spirit of God will release you from the infection of rejection, that thing that's been growing and festering and eating you up, stuck, can't move into a new job, can't move into a new relationship, can't move into anything healthy, into anything prosperous, into anything promising, because infection has taken over. We have a prescription tonight, the antibiotic that will treat your soul, that will be the remedy against your rejection infection. Listen, we out of time. Next week, though, we'll be picking up here where we left off as we talk about the truth of the matter, that rejection is a liar. You've been believing the lies. You've been believing the lies about your rejection. Rejection is a lie. Rejection is God's redirection. God, you close this one door so that you can stare me into the door. And I don't know about you, but I don't want a door that I need to walk through. I want to walk through the door. God, as you have ordered our steps, open the doors that are for us. Close the doors that ain't. Ain't that good? Ain't good English, but it is what it is. Listen, I love you. God bless you. We will see you here next time. Share this with somebody. Go back and watch the previous last couple of weeks. Listen, I believe it's going to bless you. Let it do what it's going to do in you. Let it do what it's going to do to you. Let it do what it's going to do through you. No more. We getting free from rejection, and we getting free from the infection of rejection. God bless you. I'm going to see you here next week. Set some stuff on fire, y'all.